Now we're going to talk about negative thinking. And some of us are more prone to that than others. But it's something that the science behind it is that we're actually prone to negative thinking. I mean, that we're naturally kind of wired to that. There's a little organ in our brains called the amygdala. It's not much bigger than the end of your thumb. And it controls some of that survival stuff, we'd be walking through the woods or something like that, and you have to be on guard because there may be a lion or tiger or dinosaur behind the next tree. You never know what's going to happen. So this amygdala sends out signals, watch out, things are coming up, and kind of a natural kind of anxiety about life, oh no, here it comes. So we're naturally kind of geared that way to survive. The thing is that when there aren't dinosaurs or lions or tigers or bears, lurking around us, we're still kind of on edge. We're still kind of thinking, oh no, there could be something there. That person's out to get me. And that kind of negative thinking actually is destructive. And again, the science behind it is that it can hurt us physically as well as mentally and psychologically and spiritually and all those different ways. So there's negative thinking that really isn't good for us when that's what's powering our lives. And so for this, what I'd like to do is explore all the different facets. I mean, this is a big one. All the negative thinking, the ways that we do negative thinking, explore the problem today. Take a look at that and kind of sift through that, and maybe you'll relate to some of this stuff a little bit. Next Sunday, I'd like to look at the solution for this. The solution to negative thinking, and some things that we can do, practical things that we can do with the help of the Lord to have a more positive outlook. Because it not only affects us, but affects those around us. It's infectious. Negative thinking is infectious. Positive thinking, too, is infectious in the same way. But we want to try to gear towards the positive side. And then on the third Sunday, I'd like to do a little myth busting about some negative thinking that we do corporately as a society. And many of us, including Christians, or maybe even especially Christians or religious people, that we tend to have patterns of negative thinking in our own thoughts. Kind of an oh my, kind of a doomsday kind of attitude, and talk about that on the third Sunday, and bust up some mythology that is present, and things that actually surprised me scientifically, some of the studies that have been done that kind of broke me out of a little bit of negative thinking. So today we're looking at the problem of negative thinking that affects us physically, spiritually, in every way. And it can lead to fear, depression, all sorts of things. In fact, a college study was done with something around 350 college students, and somehow they rated them according to negative thinking. Those who thought negatively, generally speaking, and those who thought positively, generally speaking. And they found that negative thinking people who generally were in that rut or mode would lead, there was 8 times the chance that they would lead into a major depression in 2.5 years. And so the study predicted that, which isn't probably great, amazing news, but it's the idea that if we're positive in our thinking, the science has shown too that we heal faster, we can solve problems better, we can just live life more fully if we're thinking more positively. And there are reasons to think more positively, but we're going to explore some of the reasons that we think negatively. And it's not just about, oh, life is going to get me, my finances are going to blow up, or even sometimes, have you ever done this, where something actually good happens and you downplay it? Where something good happens to you, God blesses you with something, and you play it down, and you say, well, I could have done better, or it wasn't quite enough, or this or that. And we just tend to even downplay the positive stuff in our lives. Sometimes negative thinking can be negative self-talk, where we're talking to ourselves in a negative. We put ourselves down. Sometimes we're the worst examples of that. We do something and we go, well, you could have done that better, or you're such a failure, or you're stupid, or, we do name calling to ourselves. And that whole internal kind of dialogue going on inside, kind of, what's wrong with you, And I mean, and we all do this to a certain extent. But again, staying in that mode can be destructive to us. Sometimes we think, and again, Christians can be not so good on this, where we are looking at kind of doomsday, where we'll do this with different presidents, whether it was President Obama or President Trump or President Bush, or it doesn't matter, but we'll see the negative things that are happening in the world around us, or the president that happens to be in charge. And we tend to get into a rut, criticizing, and that negativity catches up with us. That's why Paul says to Timothy, Paul says, let's pray for those who are in charge. Paul never qualifies to say they're the best person in town or they're the worst leader that we've ever seen, but we're to pray for people, whether we like them or not, to keep that positive kind of attitude. So sometimes we can get into negative thinking both as individuals, and there can be kind of corporate negative thinking, organizations that prey upon fears and getting into negative thinking. And negative thinking can kind of bind us together at times. It can kind of unify us. You can have negative thinking that will, against a common enemy, and we're so much better than them, and they're awful, and all of this. And there can be a kind of a corporate, organizational negative thinking to be aware of. So it's not just individual, but it can be the groups we hang around with or associate with. There's a doctor, a psychiatrist, who put together a list of different kinds of negative thinking. He calls it, what does he call it? He calls it the 10 major illusions of negative thinking. The 10 major illusions of negative thinking. And see if you relate to any of those, okay? First one is all or nothing thinking. Okay, this is where everything is either totally good or totally bad. There's no gray area. Have you ever done that before? All or nothing. I'm good, I'm bad, that person is all good, all bad. And we fail to see the in-betweenness of things. It's all black or white. Overgeneralization, where something bad happens, we generalize, somebody treats us badly and say they're a short person. We go, well, I'm going to be careful around short people. You can be sure of that. Or we overgeneralize. Racism is like that. Just picking one incident and then just saying, somebody treats us bad in church. Somebody is in a grumpy mood in church. We go, well, I'm done with religion. I don't need God anymore. We overgeneralize, right? We all do this to some extent. Negative thinking. The mental filter. You dwell on the downside of any situation while overlooking the positive. So you're filtering, and this is natural to human beings. We tend to filter things, and we look for the negative, again, because of survival. You want to get away from danger real quickly. But a fear-based lifestyle doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, it may save you for the lion or tiger, but in terms of quality of life, it doesn't really get you anywhere. And there are other ways of managing. You don't ignore the fear stuff, but you put it in its proper place rather than being dominated from it. So the mental filter. Diminishing the positive, which is somewhat like that. This kind of thinking you take positive things, turn them into negative ones, like Eeyore. Isn't that a wonderful tale that I made for you, Eeyore? Yeah, it'll probably fall off, or probably I'll trip over it and break my head open and bleed on everything. Anyway, diminishing the positives. Jumping to conclusions. It's kind of like, somebody will do something and you'll go, oh, that was against me, When you don't know the facts, you jump to conclusions. Something happens and you experience something with a friend or a family member and you go, oh, and you kind of play the mind reader. You say, I know what, obviously it's directed at me, and you jump to conclusions before you know all the facts. Negative thinking. 6 is the binocular trick. He says, if you're wearing special lenses, it lets you see everything, but it's blown out of proportion. So something negative happens and you go, I'm done. I can't, my day's ruined. I can't do this. Something, we all do this to some. the binocular thing. Everything's much bigger. The things that are happening become overwhelming so fast and so negative so fast. We're just paralyzed looking through a binocular. Emotional reasoning. You believe that your mood reflects your true identity. This is where we're attached to our feelings. And feelings are good, God-given, but what we do is we attach to them, we over-attach to our feelings and our negative thoughts, and we think that's who we are, that's what's going on, that's reality, and that's what defines it. Rather than taking a step back, we'll talk about this next Sunday a little bit, taking a step back and honoring our feelings or honoring our thoughts, but kind of stepping outside of them just a little bit and saying, well, let's take a look at this, and asking critical questions maybe, or letting God saying, okay, well, what's going on here, Jesus? Or Holy Spirit, or trying to take a more objective look at things. Still honoring our feelings, but understanding that doesn't define everything. Should and must thoughts. Constantly remind yourself the things you should or must do. At the end of the day, you feel buried in guilt and shame. You may also dwell on things that other people should or must do, setting yourself up for frustration and bitterness. Expectations. And when you don't meet those expectations, what's wrong with me? Or what's wrong with you, more likely, right? Why aren't you living up to my expectations? What's wrong with you? And setting yourself up. Labeling and mislabeling, you tend to equate yourself with what you do. Since everyone makes mistakes over time, you develop a negative self-image based on the errors you've made. Not on the positive, but on the errors that you've made. And so you tend to focus in on the stuff that you can't do. I am such a failure. What is wrong? And finally, personalization. You assume responsibility for anything that goes wrong, even when it's not your fault. Do we ever do that? He calls this line of thinking, Dr. Burns calls this line of thinking, the mother of guilt. Things that go wrong. Our kids do stuff? Yeah. Yeah, this is from, in fact, I could post this, but it's from a book called Feeling. I didn't read the book, but this is an article, a blog on that. It's called Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy. It was published in 1999 by Dr. David Burns, B-U-R-N-S. And it's what he calls the 10 grand illusions. And it leads to this negative thinking. There are so many different types of negative thinking that we can get caught up with. External kinds of things, like the news, watching the 9 and 10 o'clock news. And it's not so much there's a lot of bad news out there, but it's our reaction to it, right? There's bad stuff that can happen, and it's how we look at that. How do we see that sort of stuff? And there are things that we can do that will help us to be able to navigate that a little bit. Negative thinking is all throughout the Bible. I mean, there are negative thinkers that, or at least people who struggle with negative thinking. You think about Moses, remember the argument he has with God about, setting his people free. Well, I can't do anything. It's kind of like Eeyore. I can't talk. I can't do anything. Or, Ruth and Naomi, whose name actually in Hebrew means bitterness. Because, and again, she had people die in her family circle. But her reaction is just, she carries that depression with her wherever she goes until Ruth comes into her life in a new way. Other kinds of even Paul in Romans chapter 7 struggles with that negative thinking. What am I going to do? I've got all this sin bouncing around inside of me. What am I going to do? In fact, I have a homework assignment. Speaking of Paul in Romans chapter 7, I've got a homework assignment for you. I'd like you to read for next Sunday one chapter of the Bible. Crack open that Bible that you've got. I'd like you to read one chapter, and that is Romans chapter 8. So while Paul is all in this negative zone in Romans chapter 7, and you can read that too, I won't restrict you, but he's going, oh, what am I going to do? And all this conflict inside me, and a lot like us, human beings haven't changed. But Romans chapter 8 contains some elements that we're going to touch on next Sunday, and some practical ways to get out of negative thinking. So you can get a preview, Romans chapter 8. But the Bible, that's one of the beauties of the Bible, is that it not only shows us a wonderful picture of God, the Bible also shows us a clear and true picture of human beings in all of our messiness and dysfunction and all of that. And you read the Bible, if you read it correctly, you go, there's hope for me. There's hope. I'm a lot better than this guy. And so, by God's grace, we can find true life too. But the Bible is a very realistic book. Very realistic. So we find ways that we are all tied together in different ways of negative thinking. We all do different kinds of negative thinking in different circumstances. But how do we rise above that? Well, I'm going to give us just a little taste. I mean, there's one general answer that will kind of be a prelude to next Sunday. Just a little prelude to next Sunday. And it comes out of the Bible. It comes out of the book of Proverbs, which is a wonderful place of wisdom from King Solomon. And he shows us a way to at least begin the journey, which we'll get more into next Sunday, but begin the journey of looking at negative thinking. How do we get out of this little mud pit, this pothole of despair? What is at least a beginning point? And so if you turn to page, in your Bibles on your table, turn to page 458. Page 458. We'll take a look at a few verses here that will at least give us a launching pad for what is going on with this negative thinking and how can we begin that journey into a more positive place, the good news. Jesus' first words in the Gospel of Mark, his first words in the Gospel of Mark, and this is my translation, but it's a good reflection of the New Testament Greek, is change your thinking and trust the good news. Change your thinking and trust the good news. This is Mark chapter 1. And so it's going to be a process, a work in progress to change our thinking out of this negative thing to really trust the good news that Jesus has for us and the good news that is there for us in life, if we choose that. So are we on page 458? That should be, in fact, I'll read along rather than read my Bible. It's Proverbs chapter 3, or it should be, hopefully. Proverbs chapter 3, and we're looking at the first 8 verses. This is from King Solomon, one of the wisest men ever to walk the earth. But he went through his troubles too. He went through his negative thinking. Read Ecclesiastes. Read, I'm thinking of all the others too. A lot of the prophets, in fact, in the Old Testament, they struggled with their negative thinking too, because they were up against the sin of Israel or the sins of different nations, and they were rubbing up against that, and it's just depressing, all the bad stuff that was going on in a particular prophet's day. You can look at almost any of the prophets, and they struggled with some of that negative thinking. To stay focused upon God, and that's what this is about. Take a look and just kind of read silently along with me, looking at Proverbs 3, verses 1 through 8. My son or my daughter, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck. Notice that. Kindness and truth, both one and the other. So you will find favor and good report in the sight of God and man. And then listen to this. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. For it will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. And that's the bottom line, is this idea of learning to trust God. Well, how do you hear God? How does he direct your ways? And all this, we'll talk about that more next Sunday, but there is a part in us, in every human being. I don't care where you think you've come from or how spiritual or religious you think you are. There are almost like a set of antennae that has been built into you. And you can learn to catch the frequency of God. You don't have to be some super spiritual giant. You don't have to be some televangelist on TV or a pastor or ordained or something, or know all the verses in the Bible. Just naturally, as a human being, no matter what your age is or background, you have these little antennae in, am I dating myself? Like little rabbit ears, inside yourself, you can catch that frequency. It's called the image of God, something that's built into every human being. And we can catch that message, that sense of God's presence in our hearts. But there are some things we have to work at to do that. But you can, each and every one of us. And God doesn't care where our starting point is, because God meets us where we are. Jesus proved that. You don't have to jump through hoops or get up on a spiritual platform or perform for God. God meets us where we are, and he says, well, let's take one more step. Okay, let's take another step. And he leads us step by step into a life that is good news. That is good news. And we become changed people. And people begin to notice, well, what's going on? You seem happier. You seem better. You're not so negative all the time. Well, I'm learning. And that's what it means to be a disciple, to be a learner. Trust in the Lord with all your strength. Don't lean on your own understanding, because we get goofed up. We're seeing things through the knothole in the fence. We're seeing things through the binoculars, through a skewed kind of vision of life. We're seeing life through our hurts rather than through the places of help. And so to learn to see life as God sees it, learn to see us as God sees us, learn to see other people as God sees other people, to learn to see what the world looks like through the eyes and through the heart of a loving Creator. And we can do this step by step, gradually, as we encourage one another. So, I guess looking today at all the different ways that we think negatively, we jump to the conclusions, or what are some of the ways where you get caught? What are some of your negative thinking triggers, if you want to share those? I think about some of the places. Every once in a while, Ange and I'll joke about, the times that I'll get in. Every once in a while, I'll get into a negative kind of pattern, and it'll only last for an evening. But in the next morning, I wake up and I'll go, everything's great. That's wonderful. But sometimes in the evening, I'll just get caught into a negative pattern, and she can pick that up, and probably you can too. But I don't know. It's almost like flypaper, isn't it? Or it's like getting stuck or quicksand or something, and you can get those. I was going to show a video of a hamster on a wheel, one of those hamster wheels running like this. It's a really cute video, but I thought, no, that's an easy enough illustration. But sometimes we just get caught up into stuff, and we're not sure what's happening in that. So